I need to pull it up on my phone because that's how I actually look at the comments.
Oh, okay.
Here we go. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this, but I haven't figured it out. So I have to open it on my phone. Pull it up on my phone because that's how. Okay, cool. Christopher Sundin is already watching. He says good evening.
Good evening.
And then just one more thing, Omar, and then we can start. So for everybody that's watching, you're just in time. Just give us 1 second while we get situated here, and we'll be good to go. I'm just pulling up the questions, Omar, that I'm going to be asking you.
All right.
All right, cool. All right, we're good.
Awesome.
All right, welcome everybody to the Ninja Abingdon Martial Arts video podcast. We have Omar Gilani Sensei here from Yamajiro Dojo in Northern Virginia. And this is a very special guest to have on the show because I have been training with alongside Omar Sensei for how many years now? It's got to be at least almost 10 now, right?
Yeah, pretty close to 10 years.
Yeah. So it's funny how I always say it's funny how we all ended up. It's like all of the black belts in our organization trained together, and then at one point it's like this guy opened up a dojo, that guy opened up a dojo, that guy opened up, you know what I mean? So it's like we all, and all different parts of the country too, you know what I mean? So it's funny how that turned out. So welcome.
Thank you.
And how are things going in Northern Virginia with the whole COVID thing?
I wish I could tell you if I step foot outside. No, I'm just kidding. No, luckily the nature of my job, you know, I typically get to stay within the safety, the confines of my home.
Right.
So, you know, that's keeping me plenty busy. You know, it seems like, you know, I mean, it doesn't, I'm sure there are worse areas in the US. I'll put it that way.
Right.
So I'd say we're pretty fortunate right now.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's unfortunate, I think, for what's going on, you know, because it's affecting a lot of people in different ways. But I think other countries have it worse, needless to say. So I guess give everybody a little bit of background about yourself, your martial arts background, and maybe a little bit of background of your dojo and things like that.
Sure. Okay, so as you already mentioned, my name is Omar Gilani. If you include my middle name, Munir, that makes my initials OMG.
You should wear a shirt that says OMG on it.
I should. Also OG, but I'll leave that behind. So I grew up in Central Jersey. That's where I spent my first 20 years. And then I left there about 15 years ago, so that makes me 18 years old. So right now I'm just right outside the Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. So I'm a project manager. I work for the Defense Health Agency. And so I work really closely with military hospitals and clinics in a military and civilian environment.
Oh.
So I've been doing that pretty much since I moved back to Virginia. I guess kind of backtracking, I left Jersey about 15 years ago. And then about almost 10 years ago, I moved to Delaware for work. And that's where I met, you know, Mark Sensei. And then that's where I met you. And then after, you know, being there for 4 or 5 years or whatever, moved back to Virginia. So I'm back here again for last 5 years. And then since I've come back to Virginia, I've started my martial arts school. And currently we've hopped around in a few places. We've always been within the same vicinity. So right now we're in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. We're in an awesome location right in front of the mall, super busy area, very fortunate to be there, even though, with the whole quarantine situation lately, it's just been classes from home. My student actually has a school in Alexandria, which is, a few miles down the road. So that was, big, a big thing for me. He opened that. I think it's been, I don't even recall how long now, maybe like a year or something.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's something that you have on me. I have yet to have a student to open up a school, and I'm waiting for the day. I can help one of my students grow their school, but I guess that'll come someday.
Yeah, it's a weird feeling because it's like, I remember, our teacher, Sensei Mark, talking about your students are like your dojo kids, even if they're older than you.
Right.
And I remember I repeated that once in one of my classes. And at that time I had a gentleman who was one of my students. He was in his 50s. And, luckily it wasn't awkward. I did happen to make a joke out of it as I was saying it. But he understood the context behind it. But I mean, that's literally what it's like. And it's funny because his students are kind of like my, I don't want to say grandkids, but
Mhm.
it's interesting. But yeah, on top of that, so I also do some, so I teach classes in the evenings outside of my Monday or Friday 9 to 5, for martial arts school. Also do some freelance video editing work on the side, which you know about. And then a little bit more personal, I guess, been married for over 8 years. I'm a father to a daughter that's about to be 5 years old. So very,
You mean 5 years old going on 13?
yeah. Technically, she's home sensei. Actually, they're both home sensei. But yeah, so yeah, busy life. And right now, I think they're down the hall watching me in another room on another computer so that there's no background noise right here with her and my wife.
Nice.
So as far as martial arts, spent around 15 years. That's on and off, dabbling in a few different things. Like most kids, you either did like karate or taekwondo when you were younger.
Hmm.
I went the taekwondo route. I wanted to be like Frank Dukes from Bloodsport. As I got older, I realized I wanted to be just the Van Damme version of Frank Dukes. I'm
Right.
not
Yeah, he's not the best role model in the
no,
martial
so I've
arts.
just kept it to Van Damme.
Right.
And it got to the point where I wanted to change my name to Frank. And mind you, where I grew up, I was a huge minority to the point where like my name is so simple in today's world, Omar. And I didn't have to write my last name on any paper that was like artwork, anything that went in the hallways in elementary school until 6th grade. My teachers literally told me, Omar, don't worry about your last name. They would actually go out of their way to tell me that. Like that's how much of a minority I was. And so if you can imagine, I wanted to change my name to Frank. So I love martial arts since I was a kid. So Taekwondo, really, really helped me out with that. At least I got my feet wet. Then I stopped. Kids have different hobbies. We get into all sorts of different things. I got into like, gymnastics for a little bit with my sister. I started doing all these different sports in school, like baseball and soccer and all sorts of stuff. As I got older during college, I kind of, went back into Taekwondo again, just did a recap of it. I got back into boxing. Not get back into boxing. I started boxing. I did that for on and off for about 4 years at 2 different gyms. That was a really interesting experience. Glad I did that. And then, like I said, when I moved to Delaware about 8 to 10 years ago, I started training, in what we do right now in Ninpo.
Right.
So, and that's, short while after that, even though you had started around the same time in that training, you had left your school and come to Sensei Mark's school, I think just about a year after I had started there. And that's where our friendship began.
Right. So why Ninpo? Like why have you stuck with that one?
So the funny story about that is when I started training in Ninpo shortly
Oh,
after I
by the
moved to
way,
Delaware.
Omar, I don't mean to cut you off, but just in case, if we go off for some reason, I've been having bad internet connection here at my dojo for the past 2 weeks. If for some reason it cuts off, just stay on, don't do anything, and I'll make sure we're back on. So it's been good all day, but just in case, okay? So anyway, go ahead.
All right. Where'd I leave off?
Why Ninpo? So
Why Ninpo? Yeah, so just
why have you stuck with that for so many years?
yeah, so right after I moved to Delaware, I'd actually just finished watching the first Ip Man movie with Donnie Yen. And I was like, wow, what is this Wing Chun? That's so cool. And I wanted to learn it. I was like, I want to get back into martial arts. I just started another career and, I was in a whole new area. I had a lot more free time. It was just my wife and I there.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, as for those of us who live or have lived in Delaware, there's not a whole lot to do there. So it only took me a month to sign up at a martial arts school there. I was about 25 years old, I think. And I didn't find anything related to Wing Chun. But one of the top searches in the area was a ninjutsu school. And I was like, what is ninjutsu? Like, is that even a thing?
Right.
And I was like, ninjutsu, could it be a similar thing? So, I clicked on it and, I found a number and everything. And I called up and I forgot, I think it was Sensei Mark that I spoke with on the phone, sounded very friendly, invited me in. I went in, I don't remember, I don't know, maybe within a couple of days. And I was hooked. I've always been the kind of person that I know what I want and I don't make excuses for it if I want it. So I went in, I really liked it. I signed up almost immediately. And I remember, just starting classes just pretty much right away. So ever since then, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of reasons that I've stayed with it.
Awesome. That's a great answer. And great story, by the way. So you've trained in boxing, right? You mentioned you trained in boxing. You've also have trained in a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well, Ninpo, Taekwondo. Being that you've trained in these modern martial arts styles like boxing, BJJ, why do you think they're so popular in this era, like boxing, BJJ, kickboxing, Krav Maga? Why do you think these arts are so popular right now?
So I just want to make sure that I also, clarify a little bit more on any of my, BJJ experience. I mean, it's, I signed up at about a year ago. I had to stop going last September, actually, because of a spinal injury that I'm still working through. And so, I've only been to like a handful of classes. It's a great group of guys, great coaches there. Really, really cool techniques. It wasn't what I was expecting when I went in there. I was definitely pleasantly surprised. But obviously with our training, we've been exposed to a lot of those a lot of those techniques in many similar ways prior to that. Mm. But anyway, so kind of going directly back to your question, why are some modern martial arts so effective? I don't want to say, well, you said popular, right? Popular or effective?
Popular. Like, why do you think,
okay.
In your opinion, why are they so popular now?
Well, I think the main reason is because you can really see the results of their training, like in every single class, right? Mm-hmm. And so a big part of modern martial arts is really is competition. And it's not to say that that's the sole purpose of all of them, but it's competition and sparring. You see that a lot because that's that competition / sparring environment. That's what helps you to keep improving your technique.
Right.
And that's what separates theory from application. And
right.
The problem with most traditional martial arts schools is nowadays they're literally just stuck in theory and, training in a very, very controlled environment where it's just kata and there's like no randori, there's no sparring, no nothing. So, a couple hundred years ago, however long ago, these techniques, you would have the practice to use them in the battlefield.
Right.
But once society started changing that, and I think, I don't know if now's the right time, maybe we can get into that a little bit later, but, eventually society started changing where we didn't really have to worry about things like that. And where we had more laws and well-established militaries where, not everyone, people just scatter around in huts and villages and everyone had to learn how to, fight for defend their villages. It's not like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Um, so you have Ninpo right over here.
Mhm.
You have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over here. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, what's your take on both styles? Uh, what's where do you see the benefit of Ninpo? Where do you see the benefit of BJJ? Do you see any disadvantages of both? Like, what's your take on both styles if you put them next to each other? Right, you know, if you take a really good Ninpo martial artist versus a very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu martial artist, what's your opinion?
It's not a black and white answer. It's a tough question. I have to provide context behind that before I can
Okay, go
give
ahead.
any attempt to
Let's get
answer
into
that.
it. Let's get into the nitty gritty.
All right. I do want to first mention, though, that, you know, for anyone else that's watching this right now or that will watch in the future, this is, you know, personally for me, I kind of stopped telling people I train in Ninpo because number one, most people don't know what it is,
Right.
right? And
Oh yeah.
I don't have the time of day to explain to every single person, you know, what Ninpo is.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then, you know, once you try to explain to them and then you say the word ninjutsu or, you know, whatever, then they start looking at you and start doing funny hand signs, you know, like Naruto, you know, or whatever.
Right.
And
Or you get this. Boom, smoke bomb, disappear.
yes, exactly. It's like, well, I can see you. You're not a very good ninja, are you? And it's just like, all right, that joke is old now. You can
Right.
only hear it for so many years before you're just tired of it.
Right.
So, you know, it's the thing is, it's also, it's not your conventional self-defense system as most people understand self-defense today. It's very, very different.
Right.
You know, this is probably the most misunderstood art out there in the world today, out of, you know, any other martial arts system. And then so in terms of physical techniques, the far majority of what we do is mostly jujitsu anyway. So
Right.
I always just tell people I study jujitsu.
Right.
And then even if you think about it historically, it's, you know, you can't imagine it was too different. You know, since the ninja were really just samurai, utilizing techniques and strategies focus on like subtlety. So keyword being subtle, right? So,
Right.
but
Um,
anyhow, just mhm.
oh no, I was just gonna say, because it seems like you're diving into a little bit of history.
Yeah,
Um, you know, what gets to me is most of the time, you know, when I talk to a BJJ martial artist, and most of the time it's a newer martial arts. Like they're training in BJJ, but they haven't been training a while,
yeah, I know where
maybe
this is
less than
going.
a year. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and they have no idea where BJJ actually comes from, right? Or how even the word jujitsu originated from, right?
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that, okay? You know, let's
Yeah,
talk.
I'm glad you said that because I wanted to get more into the jiu-jitsu aspect of that. I think that's more of a fair comparison between Japanese jiu-jitsu and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right?
Right,
So uh, for Japanese jiu-jitsu, I want to start talking about that really quick. I mean, that's pretty much well known, right? Um, Jiu-jitsu, the art of the samurai, it had for centuries, you know, over, you know, even 1,000 years or however old people, however far back people want to date it, had constantly been evolving. And so what a lot of people don't understand is jiu-jitsu as you see it in a lot of like today, like sport jiu-jitsu as well, it's very different than how it was historically.
right,
And that was really just a culmination. That was traditional mixed martial arts.
mhm,
So people credit a lot of other figures from the 20th century with establishing mixed martial arts, and that's not a true statement. And I love Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee was also not the father of mixed martial arts. You know,
right,
Bruce Lee is one of my idols, but he wasn't. This has been something that historically, through, you know, different corners of the world, that martial arts had been mixed to create well-balanced fighters, and jiu-jitsu is one of those arts. So all throughout history, they incorporated anything that was going to help them: swords and staffs, and, you know, bows and arrows, and eventually firearms. You know, when the Europeans and the Americans started, you know, coming into Japan, um, you know, and then there's so basically jiu-jitsu just kept evolving, right?
right,
Today we mostly just understand it as the art of grappling, right? Of joint locks and submissions. But there was, you know, a lot of, you know, an argument can be made that, you know, karate's foundations also came from jiu-jitsu, right? Because there are also a lot of forms of karate within Jujutsu Ruha. You know, some
Right.
of them that you and I even have certifications in.
Right.
You know, like a Koto-ryu, for example, very, very karate based.
Right.
But anyhow, so I mean, that's, you know, that started changing for Japanese jiu-jitsu around the, you know, 1860s, 1880s or so, right? Towards the end of the Tokugawa era. But I kind of want to get into now, into the next part of that, where I don't want to go too much into tangent about history, but it's important to bring this up to set the context. So the first important thing is also to know where Japanese martial arts started shifting from Koryu to Gendai, right? So Koryu just means like ancient in roots, and Gendai is like modern in roots, right? So you have pre-Edo period martial arts, which is about 1868, and you have, you know, post-Edo period martial arts, which are Gendai, and that's post-1868, and there's a reason for that. So towards the end of the Tokugawa period, which is around, you know, mid to late 1800s, Japan began slowly moving away from being like a warrior society dominated by samurai. And that was because of the huge economic growth that, you know, the Tokugawa shogunate, you know, that they were responsible for. They really, really helped bring, you know, like a surplus in Japanese economy for a few hundred years, like 300 years. And so because of that, that also attracted a lot of Western influence, and that included firearms. And so, you know, you're talking about bringing firearms into a country that's been at civil war with itself for almost 1,000 years. You know, so what happens to, you know, people that are used to bows and arrows and swords? Not to say that, to make it sound like the Japanese, you know, were, you know, like barbarians or anything. But, you know, compared to firearms, obviously that was, you know, a different playing field. So in the mid to late 1600s, you know, just important to note that Japanese jiu-jitsu was still a primary art of the samurai, and that was very, very dominant in like tournaments between schools, because that was still a thing back then for students to hone their skills against each other. You know, it was very dominant. So in about 1882, there was a man, which a lot of Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioners are familiar with his name, and also a lot of Japanese martial artists also, a man named Jigoro Kano. He created the Kodokan. Right. And that's today known as a judo organization, even though back then it was really, everything was just called jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. So, you know, judo, what it really did was modify jiu-jitsu techniques to focus more on throws and using weapons. To utilize throws instead of using weapons. And then that became also known as Kano jiu-jitsu, right? Jigoro Kano. Right. So technically not judo, but judo. So right. Regular jiu-jitsu at that time continued to maintain its more battlefield style techniques for war. And then Kano had, you know, discovered a new student at that time. His name was Mitsuyo Maeda. Sorry if you hear my daughter, she's coming out the hallway. Mitsuyo,
she's probably like, "Hi, Dad. I could see you on the TV."
Deja vu. Yeah, it looks like she's going to the bathroom. But anyhow, so he discovered this, you know, a child named Mitsuyo Maeda, and he was a prodigy in martial arts. So as jiu-jitsu schools were still dominating other schools in competition, Maeda, as he, you know, continued to progress in his martial arts, he decided to incorporate more newaza, so that's ground techniques, as he had also had experience with Takagiru, you know, and so Takagiru should be familiar to all of us Japanese jiu-jitsu practitioners. Right. So eventually, Maeda and his colleagues, they began like dominating the other schools in tournaments in Japan at that time. This is now like the late 1800s. And so Maeda and his colleagues, what they started doing was they started traveling more. Then they left Japan. They started, this is like the early 1900s now. So they started traveling to like even like Europe, and started, you know, sparring and entering competitions against like wrestlers and stuff like that. And eventually, I don't know, maybe around like somewhere between 1910 and 1920 or so, Maeda settled in Brazil. And so he opened up a school there. And then his Brazilian nickname was Kandakoma. You know, apologize if I mispronounced that. And that really just meant Count Combat, like Count Dracula, but Count Combat. Nice. So from there, he met, well, there was a young boy named Carlos Gracie, and he just happened to see Mitsuyo Maeda fighting in a tournament in Brazil. And Carlos was already training in judo at the time, but not like Maeda's, because Maeda's system was a little bit more different, had more newas incorporated. And mind you, Carlos Gracie, him and his brother Helio, they had already had like a wrestling background as well by this time, even though they were like teenagers. But eventually they went to Maeda. They started learning under him or under his students or something, right, in Brazil. So they started incorporating and adapting more of his newaza techniques. And then eventually, long story short, they started pioneering what's known today as Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, or also known as like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Right. So eventually, the Gracies followed the trend of Maeda traveling the world, challenging other martial artists in tournaments. And you can see a big part of that trend carried on decades later.
Yeah.
And that started from Japan, that whole ideology. Well, at least for, I'm not talking about traveling to other schools, challenging them. That didn't start in Japan, but from this line.
Right.
So that's basically, how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came through, in a nutshell, into, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And then so throughout this time, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu still existed. It also spread around the world, adapting and just being incorporated within other styles, so for its effective use of like, obviously throws, joint locks, submissions, things like that. Weapons training, so very popular among, law enforcement, military, and then becoming the basis for a lot of other styles like, Aikido, and obviously, we just talked about Judo and, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and even other things, which, for the sake of, keeping it a little bit peaceful, I'm not going to say, but needless to say, there's a surprisingly large amount of similarities and techniques from a lot of other martial arts today from Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
So that's really it. So, kind of going back to, Ninpo or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu versus Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. I'm sorry, this is a very long-winded answer, and I want to make sure I give the full
this is why
context
we're here.
behind it.
That's
okay.
That's why we're here.
There's two different platforms, right? And even though Gracie Jiu-Jitsu initially started out as a, and well, actually, they still advertise themselves like this today, as a self-defense school. It's very effective in what they do. And there's a reason why it's so widely used in competitions also, because you can do it. You're not being shown techniques like this is how you, this is how you kill someone. You can't, how do you practice that? And so a lot of those things were removed. Whereas with Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, you're taught all of it, but you're also taught a lot more stuff. And there's just this much, 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 much larger curriculum of techniques. So the time it takes to learn to become really proficient in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, I'm not talking about getting your black belt, because that's the opposite. I'm talking about in order to become really proficient in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's a big difference.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, you can get your black belt, an average of like, 5 years with Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, whereas, you're looking at typically around like 10 years for Brazilian.
Right.
But again, if we're just talking about skill and not belts, it's even longer for Japanese. But anyhow, different settings, right? We're a purely self-defense based system. We are not focused on making it effective in the ring, and we get a lot of slack from people because of that. We, as in, a lot of traditional martial arts or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, so that's the reality of it. And because of a lot of techniques, it's hard to show in a tournament or competition or sparring setting.
Right, it's not allowed.
No, it's not.
And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I have high respect for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu martial artists. Obviously, it's used in the UFC, things like that. And if it wasn't effective, it wouldn't be used in the UFC, right? What I usually have an issue with personally is people, and like I said, these are usually young Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu martial artists. And I mean young as in, they're not, they don't have their own schools or anything like that. They just come in and train maybe less than a year of training. They have no idea where their training, where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu came from, right? So, they think, and usually, you and I have gotten into online battles with people, back and forth about this,
Yeah.
and they have no clue that, they think that we're just, dressing up as ninja, playing with ninja stars and swords, that's our training. They have no idea that we do grappling. They have no idea that we do throwing or, nagewaza. They have, no idea that we do joint locks and submissions and, all this other stuff. It's just, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu martial artist is an expert at newaza. The judo martial artist is an expert at nagewaza, right? And then you have other martial arts that they're proficient at that, right?
Right.
So, but the same time frame is usually, I think you're usually not proficient, in what you're doing till at least 10 years of training, right?
Yeah. Absolutely agree with that.
I look at videos of myself from when I started, or even like a year ago, and I'm like, oh my god, like that looks terrible, right? And then like I look at videos of me now, and I'm like, I'm just and I'm a third-degree black belt, and I think, and I'm like, I'm just starting to look decent, right? I don't know if that you look at yourself like that.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially those Facebook memories that come up of videos we've shared from a year, 2 year, 3 years. It's embarrassing.
Right. Right. Well, even, I'm still I'm my worst critic. So I'll watch a video from like a week ago and I'm like, that doesn't look so good. I could have changed this and this and that. Right. But, me personally, I'm just starting to think like, okay, I'm just starting to get it. Right.
Yeah.
And, and I think people don't understand that as, it takes time, to actually really know what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I remember 1 month after starting training in this art, right? Just 1 month after, no, maybe about 2 months. I came back down to Virginia. I went to hang out with my siblings, my sisters, their friends, and my brother-in-laws. We went out for Halloween into the city, and on the way out, I'm not going to say where or anything, but on the way out, that basically there was a guy that was drunk that was just causing trouble with someone in our group, and long story short, I had to jump in, and I just moved by reaction. Like the guy was running down he was really drunk and belligerent. He was a big guy though. I mean, I'm about 5'7" to 5'8", 165 pounds, and this guy must have been about 6'2", 220, right? At least 6'2". And so he's running down the sidewalk chasing after my brother-in-law, who had his back turned the other way, walking away. And so I see this happening, and basically when this situation, there was basically a situation between them earlier that night, and I wasn't there, so the guy didn't know that I was part of that group. So when we left the lounge, and the guy's running down the hallway, down the sidewalk towards my brother-in-law's back, I just stuck my foot out just by reaction, and and so he kind of like tripped over it. He was about to catch himself, but then I punched him in the side of the head, all by pure reaction. And then he kind of went flying with the momentum of his his running, and flew into some like tables or whatever. And as he got up and he looked at me like this, and I was stunned. I was like, I was just shook. I was like, what did I just do? Oh my God, he's gonna break every bone in my body. So I'm there and I'm shook. And he comes up and he's just like hitting, punching. The guy is drunk, so he doesn't have his full force, and I'm fine. I got bullied my entire childhood growing up. I know what it's like to get hit. I'm not afraid to get hit in the head. I've had 10 concussions before I even got into high school. Wow. But so he's he's hitting me, whatever, and my back gets pushed up against a car that's parallel parked on the street, and so I'm like, oh God, this is not good. This guy's literally like on top of me now. So the first thing I thought of was honjime or gyakjime, right? For those that don't know, it's a collar choke.
Yeah.
And so I wrap one hand around his neck, I wrap my other hand, around his neck from the other side, and I just pull him forward, his face towards my head up here, right? So he doesn't have leverage to keep punching me. And then I start slowly applying the choke. And I literally felt his body weight just slowly dropping. This is after maybe just 2 months of training. And I just learned this technique once, and I just happened to remember it right there from muscle memory. I wasn't setting him up for anything. It was pure muscle memory. And that's a technique I learned from Sensei Mark. And, need to say that, situation didn't end there. The guy's friends jumped in. Luckily, it was just to break it up. There's about 20 of them. Luckily they were, and they had their wits about them. So, it broke up and it didn't get bad. But if they didn't pull him away, they didn't know I was choking him out. He would have just collapsed, and so the situation could have been a lot worse. So does it work? Yes. If he was a Muay Thai fighter and he wasn't drunk, or if he was like a black belt BJJ practitioner or something or whatever, and he wasn't drunk, then I would have had a lot of, harder time pulling something like that off. But we don't train for competitions.
Right.
We train for self-defense situations against people who aren't athletes. There's a difference. That works for some people, and that's great, right? Different strokes for, however the saying goes, different strokes for different folks. Okay, there you go. But yeah.
So why do you think, we touched on this a little bit. I guess I did. So why do you think Ninpo gets a bad rap? Not a bad rap, but like, it gets laughed at, especially from judo martial artists and Brazilian jiu-jitsu martial artists, things like that.
So aside from what I said about too much theory and not enough practical application in today's world, I'm going to categorize Ninpo practitioners into 2 categories. All right. One is the traditionalists. All right. So sadly, that's most of the Ninpo world. And that these people are only worried about kata and preservation of ancient skills. Right. And if that's the goal that people have, that's what they want to do, that is fine for them. Right. That's all, well said and done.
Right. I agree. For example, I teach a sword program here, mm-hmm. Right? Can you use a baseball bat doing sword techniques? Of course, right? Mm-hmm. But most likely these techniques are not going to save you from somebody pulling out a firearm, right? Yeah, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever, or tackling you to the ground. What then, right? You can't use your baseball bat or sword or whatever, you know what I mean? So, but that's for, not everyone wants to get on the ground, get thrown around, grapple, things like that. So keep going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the second category is I'm just going to say, for the lack of a better phrase, the true followers of Ninpo. And that's the small fraction of us. And I really mean us, right? Especially with, under, our teacher, Renshi Mark Bramble, for Ninpo US, our organization, our whole idea is to really make Ninpo what it should have been today. And I think this is a topic that a lot of people are afraid to really get into. I have no problem saying it, obviously, because I don't have a lot of connections with a lot of people. I have that advantage. But, I think the whole idea is nin. And for those that don't know, ninpo, ninjutsu, right? The nin means to persevere. And that's, to adapt. And so you have to continuously adapt to today's world. So we're talking about the real ninja of today's world, the operative folks. That's the CIA, MI6, and, all these other special operations folks around the world. But then you have, some of the other folks, the speculative folks, that are, people, I guess you can say people like us, right, who use it more for a self-defense system. And so the art has to adapt. you have to learn, yes, learning, there's great knowledge throughout history because what broke bones 1,000 years ago will break bones today. But how do you enter into someone's guard? Someone who's using a guard from modern style. Nowadays, everyone knows something on the street.
Right.
When you and I were younger, it was all about wrestling. WWE or WCW, even before that, WWF.
Remember
Everyone.
ECW?
What's that?
Do you remember ECW?
No, I
Extreme
don't know.
Championship Wrestling?
No, I don't know about that one.
Oh man, that
Let
was
me
that
be.
was that was hardcore stuff. Anyway, keep
Okay.
going.
So people, what did we do as kids? We used to like throw each other around, just like
Yeah.
pretending we were wrestlers because we saw this stuff on TV. And then you had the other people like boxers, right? Boxing was big back then. And then what happened, there was some kind of shift in like the late 90s or something where, mixed martial arts started getting really big in the US, and then, UFC and all that stuff. So then people started learning basic single leg, double leg takedowns, rear naked chokehold. These are household names now. So the way people fight has changed. And because of that, not for the purpose of us going into competitions and sparring against these people, it's something that we should know how to protect against in a real life self-defense situation.
Mhm.
And I've personally seen, and had to have, I'll just put it this way, I've been in situations against attackers where they've known some of these things. And one of those times, again, without going into details, there was a mix up, there was a bouncer, and the guy put me in like a rear naked chokehold, thought I was someone doing something I shouldn't have. It got sorted out. This was several years ago. And I remember trying to lift this guy up. It was like 250 pounds, put me in a rear naked choke, standing up. And I almost dropped him, almost threw him over my shoulder, but I didn't. And, because he pulled back a little bit too. And then, someone else that was in my group, they were getting, unfortunately, hurt by another bouncer doing something they shouldn't have been. So the guy kind of just, asked me to go down on my knees, and I just complied with him, and I was smiling and joking. I was like, "You train, bro?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's cool." I was like, "So do I." And so he let me go, so the situation calmed down. Um, but, um, but anyhow, I'm just saying, like, that situation could have gotten very ugly, and it didn't, luckily. Right. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. On why Ninpo gets a bad rap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does. Basically, to reiterate what you said, you believe there's two types of Ninpo martial artists. One that only do traditional kata, and which was made for
Mm-hmm.
wearing armor, or whatever, ancient battlefield. And there's other Ninpo martial artists that do a lot of ronderie, a lot of sparring, things
Yep.
like that.
Yeah.
I know you guys do a ton of grappling at your school. Especially with your student Josh, who's excellent grappler.
That's for sure. One of my grappling coaches before I even started at my Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school.
Right. Yeah, he's excellent. Excellent grappler, better than me. I'm a higher rank than him in Ninpo, but he's a better grappler than I am. He's just been grappling a lot longer than I have. You know what I mean? It is what it is.
Right.
He's put in the work into that.
Right.
But that's good. So let's talk a little bit, because I love this topic and it fires me up. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about these ninjutsu keyboard warriors. What's your take on them? Because to be quite frank with you, I believe they give us the worst rap. Guys that don't train,
yeah,
but know everything there is to know about our art, and if you put up a video, they'd be the first to comment and be like, "You're doing it wrong," but they don't train. What's your take?
Are you talking about people that claim they train in ninjutsu, or people that are just critical of ninjutsu?
I'm talking about people that just read books and watch videos online.
Okay. All right. All right. So I don't think it's only ninjutsu people that do that, although I do agree with you. There are many people like that. My advice for them would be to just calm down and train harder. I mean,
Well, I think,
let's,
well, that's the issue. They're not. These are the types of people that they're not. They don't want to step foot in the dojo because of whatever reason. They're scared or shy or whatever. But they'll be the first to comment on a certain Gyokoru technique or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of going to fall back to something I just said. Like I really do think it's common in, a lot of different martial arts styles. And the first thing that tells me when people do that is, is your skill level in martial arts. Because how I see it is, if you're a black belt and you're still egotistical, you're not a good martial artist. Right? You may have some physical skill, but if you have physical skill, then and you have a black belt, then you could have been a whole lot better than you already are.
Right.
Because the only way for you to become great is to go through challenges. And what happens when you go through challenge after challenge? Every time you test for a new rank, you get humbled. You go and it's either sink or swim. You pass one obstacle, you come up to another wall, and you either decide, can I climb it, or can I, do I just turn around and walk away? And every time you decide to get over that wall, that obstacle in front of you, your ego starts going down a little bit.
Right.
And you become more humble because you respect that struggle. And then you see other people doing it, new people that start coming through the door, and you can understand their situation. So it creates this sense of like being humble, and your ego starts going down. And that just goes to show, because you're becoming confident. You're now, being well journeyed. And so for me, that's one of the biggest things. And so, there's no point in paying attention to people like this online. Not saying you are or anything, but I think that's true of not just, ninjutsu keyboard warriors, but, but anyone. And we tend to see this a lot with modern martial artists, where, they think that, everything that they don't understand is just pure BS. And that drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. And I've kind of just stopped responding to these things, because you can't argue with people that are not willing to listen to reason, so
it's just ignorant.
You can't win against the ignorance.
Yeah, ignorance. That's exactly what I was going to say. So what do you think we need to do? I started the Takamatsu Den Facebook group. So anybody that's watching this and is into Ninpo, please join us on our Facebook group. It's called Takamatsu Den Ninpo, or Ninpo Takamatsu Den. And we're just in there talking about Ninpo and how it relates to the modern world. And we got some good conversation going already. And I just started the group like a couple of days ago. What do you think Ninpo needs to do? What do we need to do to show to the public that Ninpo is effective? How can we prove it?
I think we need to show we're different. I know there's been conversation about looking at what other people and what other systems, what are they doing right, but none of that stuff happened overnight.
Oh yeah.
And I think because what we have really truly is unique, and I mean that in a very extreme way. It's very different, and as I already said earlier in this in this podcast, we are the most misunderstood martial arts system in the world. And so we need to embrace how we're different, show we're different, and build our own branding, and try not to copy other successful ones too much. Learn from who's done things right, but then also know how to show what we have that's different. So martial arts in the West are very different, right? You and I have these conversations a lot. We know it's just different here in the U.S.
Right.
We have a very unique and lazy mentality here.
Yeah.
People have expectations that everything should be done in 5 minutes or less. So, we come from, another Ninpo organization, which was, very, very stringent rules, very strict, but they did not adapt to the US, which is why so many Ninpo practitioners from the US have left. And it is failing in the US for a reason, because they're two separate worlds and there's that inability to adapt. That's not Ninpo. So, I do like something I heard, in that group you created recently, American ninjutsu. I really like that. I really thought about that phrase. So, part of that big venture that Ninpo US is doing is really to help, people out here, especially in the West, really realize what Ninpo really has to offer in the world. We have great techniques, but I really like how we've created this system that shows how to use them in a very practical method that you don't really see in a lot of other extremely strict and traditional, other organizations. So, you either sink or you swim. You have to adapt.
Right.
I would like to say Ninpo US is really here to adapt.
Right. I think we also need to start competing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think that's a big thing. Usually, Ninpo martial artists, we say we don't compete because, what we do is very, very dangerous and blah, 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 blah. Well, I think it's time to put our money where our mouth is. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I think we need to start going to tournaments and things like that. And if we fail, we fail. We learn. We know, hey, if somebody gets us in a rear naked choke because I did XYZ, well, I know not to do XYZ next time, right? So that's the only way we're going to learn. That's the only way that I think that, people are going to recognize that what we do is effective. And I tell my students this all the time is they have no idea how special the art that they're learning is, that they are learning is. They cannot go to any other school, within, I don't even know, like, I'm sure there's other people teaching Ninpo martial arts, maybe within 20 miles of here, but it's probably one teacher in his house or, down in a grungy gym or something like that. We provide, you and I provide a nice facility to our students, and really teach real Ninpo to these people, to these students. And I don't think they understand sometimes how special this art really, really is, because it's not a regular Taekwondo school, karate school in a plaza center where you can find every 2 miles.
Yeah, that's how it is here in Northern Virginia. You can't go to a single shopping center without a karate or Taekwondo school. Between here and where my dojo is about a 25 to 27-minute drive. You'll probably pass at least 100 different martial arts schools, at least 100. And I'm talking about, it's probably about 17 miles from here. It's crazy how many there are. And it's majority of them are focused, for like kids classes and stuff like that. That's really popular here. But yeah, I mean, what we do is just so different. And I would really love to see, in the future that, what we do grow, get a lot bigger. I do also want to say, I actually wanted to mention this earlier in the podcast, kind of going a little bit back to that conversation about like, Japanese and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and kind of tying in, you start talking about like keyboard warriors and stuff like that. And we've been victims of this as well, where we've had, practitioners of, BJJ, like from, random people on the internet, who are sadly notorious for this. I love, the guys in my gym, they're a great bunch of guys. In fact, the head coach is I think like a 2nd degree black belt or something in Japanese jiu-jitsu as well, by the way.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, they're a great bunch of guys, so nothing about them or anyone. Like I said, there's always a minority of everyone in every group, that are pretty crazy, but we get that a lot. Mostly, these guys announce themselves as, BJJ practitioners. And so the funniest comments is, your tachiwaza, your standing techniques are bad. That's not realistic. Your hip throw is not realistic. How are you going to throw someone like that? And it's things like that, not understanding that, there's techniques you do, standing, let's say you have your feet like this, spread apart, your legs like this, versus having them together, right? Together is more popular with judo. Having them further apart, typically, not on every case, is more common with jiu-jitsu, because you're looking at indoor, dry, flat surface versus outdoors, potentially, gravel, mud, slippery, whatever. You want to be lower. So you spread your legs out further. So there's little granular things like that the public is missing. And I want to settle this once and for all. The topic of spelling of jiu-jitsu. Let the internet know here that I'm going to settle this once and for all. Okay.
So let me give you a little background story. When I first opened this location here, okay, so this is my third location, right? When I opened this location here and I put my signage up, it says I teach ninjutsu, jujitsu. I had a guy come in. I wasn't even open yet, I don't think. I think we were in here working, getting the mats in and stuff. And I had a guy come in and literally say, "Hey, you spelled jujitsu wrong." Because, we spell it J-U, J-U, right?
Yeah.
"You spelled jujitsu wrong." And I'm like, "No, I didn't." And he goes, "Ha ha," and left, right? He's thinking in his head, he's like, "This idiot," right?
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway, go ahead.
Wow.
Go ahead.
So I mean, the funny thing is it's written in Japanese anyway, right? And so we're writing them in English characters. So it's none of there's that difference, but there is a difference because we're still talking about pronunciation, right? So, for example, and sorry if you hear these loud, cars been revving it up this evening. That's weird. So let's talk about the Brazilian spelling: Jiu, Jitsu, Jiu-jitsu. The kanji for jitsu, it means truth or to tell the truth, right? Jiu-jitsu, which is J-U-J-U-T-S-U, the kanji for jutsu, mind you, not jit, jutsu, it means technique or the use of a technique, right? Like kenjutsu, aikijutsu, hambo jutsu, right? Any kenjutsu, all this stuff, jutsu, it's not jitsu. And so now we're talking about the hiragana for J-U, that's written, it's actually, it would be written out like J-I-Y-U, but it's still pronounced Ju, okay? So what does that mean? That means gentle. So now if we're talking about the correct one, it's a matter of interpretation. Jiu-jitsu, as per the Brazilian spelling, J-I-U, J-I-T-S-U, essentially means the gentle truth. Whereas jiu-jitsu, how we spell it, means gentle techniques. And so that's not something that's not a matter of interpretation, right? I don't really care about how something is spelled, but when we constantly hear the same argument, you guys are doing something fake, what you guys have been doing, even though it's been around for a few thousand years, it's fake, and you guys are doing it wrong and we're doing it right. That's such a silly argument. Now, if the sooner people like that go away and they start, understanding the similarities in Japanese and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, I think it's so essential for these two communities to come together, and really it should just be jiu-jitsu. It shouldn't have to clarify Japanese or Brazilian, because that's what we really need: masters of the ground and masters of the stand-up.
Right.
There's so many advantages to both sides. And I think, for me, like I love, unfortunately because of my condition, I haven't been able to go train for many months, and minus this whole COVID-19 situation. And like I said, they're a great bunch of guys, but this was kind of going back on that topic of keyboard warriors, and then showing, the public, how can Ninpo be effective? And I think we really need to show everyone that we're incorporating other styles as well.
I agree. I just want to say before we ask the last question, if anybody has any questions for Omar Gilani Sensei, please post them now and we'll get through the questions. But last question before we wrap it up, unless anybody else has any questions. What's your personal take on traditional organizations, Ninpo organizations like the Genbukan, Bujinkan, Jininkan? Obviously, you have firsthand experience in the Genbukan, since that's how you and I started. Well, you started. I was in another organization before that, but yeah. So, what's your take on these traditional organizations nowadays?
It's hard for me to really speak about Jin-In-Kan is so, I'm going to start with that. We'll start with saying I can't say anything about the Jin-In-Kan because I don't really know anything about them other outside of, certain things that I've heard, which essentially is really just going to be conjecture at that point. I don't have any personal experience with them. I've met and seen guys from Bujinkan, I think that, it's really big. And as we know that anytime something grows really big, any organization, whether it's just a business, martial arts, or a gym, or whatever it is, you start running into quality control issues. That's a fact, right? And so I see a lot of, from my perspective, and also clarifying that I haven't been
So
specifically involved
let me
with them.
stop you right there. Okay.
Yeah.
So this goes into BJJ. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So we can say, big organization, quality control, right? Or lack of quality control. But how come, say Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, they're huge, right? Do you think they have a lack of quality control?
Not really, because they're actually not.
So why do you think the Bujinkan has a lack of quality control?
Well, for the Gracies, there's so many Gracie family members. They're actually split in so many different. Gracie is not unified, actually. The Gracie Jiu-Jitsu world. There's so many different cousins and brothers and uncles and third cousins, fourth uncles, dog removed. There's so many. So it's not one giant organization, but as far as now answering your question directly about my thoughts on, well, from what I've seen from the Bujinkan, it's really there's I get the sense that we're talking about from a top-down structure. It's not really set up for success, right? And this is kind of going into the conversation with the podcast that you had last week as well, that there's just a whole lot of it's the best way to say it. I'm trying to be a little bit political here.
Right. And I think I have high respect for certain Bujinkan martial artists, right?
Yeah.
Like I have high respect for Duncan Stewart. Okay, he's phenomenal, high skilled. Even a local guy, George from What Would Ninjas Do? Phenomenal, great skill. I've seen his videos. I know he can move, but he was also in the Genbukan as well. So, I've seen who else? There's just several others I've seen. I can't think of quick names off the top of my head, but
yeah, this is a great group out in Greece that I follow on Facebook as well. I mean, those
right.
guys, every video they do is just fantastic stuff.
There's certain people out there in Bujinkan, they're good. They know their stuff and they move well and they know, they're good. I think personally, and it's anybody can join it, right? Without even having to actually physically train in a dojo. I think that's the main difference. There's people out there that are Bujinkan that never stepped foot in the dojo and never studied under a teacher.
Yeah, and how many times have you and I heard of and seen things where people have gotten their black belts in a year?
Yes.
And that's there's you just can't do it.
Right.
And it's not right. That just shows that if you can demonstrate techniques, just because you can demonstrate techniques, in a controlled environment doesn't mean you're a black belt.
Right.
Where's the journey, the miles, and under your belt, to gain that wisdom to get that. So, it's things like that. And it's not that that's everywhere, in the Bujinkan. And certainly Bujinkan is not the only organization guilty of things like that. It's martial arts around the world, but there's definitely big quality control issues. Yes, they're big, they're a lot in number, but I think there's this, like Ninpo in the modern world really just needs to be certainly not reinvented, but definitely re-imaged.
Okay.
And
what about the Genbukan?
yeah, so as far as the Genbukan, I felt like certainly as far as technique, and obviously I'm going to be more biased here because I was personally involved with the Genbukan. I saw high level of technique and, a lot of like events and Taikai and stuff that we had been to, amongst a lot of the senior ranks. I've, had the pleasure of meeting, several of them, met the Grandmaster. I mean, the first time I met the Grandmaster, Soka Tanemura, for the Kyokushin seminar in Mexico City, when he moved, I was surprised. My jaw dropped.
Right, and he was what, like 68 years old at the time?
Yeah, he was about 68.
Yep.
And my jaw literally just dropped, and I was like, I cannot believe I just saw someone move that fast. I thought stuff like that only happened on TV. It was unreal, and that for me just kind of just it sent something off sparking in my mind. It was just like, wow, I guess you don't really see all the good stuff on TV.
And he's short. He's like 5'1",
Yeah.
or whatever. And you're seeing this little Japanese old man taking down like big dudes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it was impressive how quick, how precise he was. His techniques were just flawless. And here's the thing, a lot of that goes back to also because, aside from his extensive, history and training and grew up in a samurai, family pretty much, he was also in law enforcement. And in Japan, they don't use firearms for law enforcement. It's all hand-to-hand techniques.
Right.
So he had that, I'm not going to say sparring, but that hand-to-hand, skill set behind his techniques. Now, where do I think a lot of Ninpo organizations fail today is translating a teacher's experience to their students, because sometimes teachers have a lot of sparring or fight real life experience. Now, how do you pass that on to students that don't have that?
Right.
Like, I'm not a great martial artist or anything, but I'm not afraid to get hit. I know what it feels like. I've been in a lot of different scuffles. And so, mostly when I was younger, but, how do you pass on what it feels like to get hurt, to get hit hard by someone, and you don't know if they want to kill you or not? Like, how do you really pass that on, right? Constantly have them do sparring and competitions and stuff. It's the closest thing you can do in today's world. So we need more of that in Ninpo. And the big organizations, they need that. Because competition is, as far as I understand, I don't know how it is in Bujinkan and Jininkan, but you can't do that in the Genbukan, at least not publicly.
No, you can't. Definitely not.
There's reasons.
Strict rules.
Yeah, obviously, that comes down to liability and stuff like that, and I understand, but there's the whole jujitsu side of it as well.
Right, I agree. So we got a few questions here. Let's get into some questions. Christopher asked, what are your thoughts on gi versus no gi training, and might it be incorporated into future training?
Great question. Yeah, absolutely. I love any of the classes. For example, I started going to with my Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school. I could only make the advanced classes, and the advanced classes were always no gi. And so even though that's not what I originally wanted to do, that's what I did because those were the only classes I could make. And I loved it really quick. It changes your technique completely. So yes, absolutely. Short answer. Absolutely. That's something that, other schools should adopt. Don't get too used to having a big, heavy lapel to grab on in someone's gi, right? Or a belt, a belt an easy target.
I'm definitely guilty of not doing, no gi training, which I'm going to incorporate more once this COVID thing is over.
Awesome.
So, but yeah, I agree. We got a question from Josh. He said, earlier you said Ninpo practitioners say the art is too deadly in competition. What techniques or styles do you think they are referencing to as too dangerous? And are there ways to adapt them for competition? So I'll let you answer that.
What was the first? I didn't hear the first part of that clearly.
I think he's saying, like, what techniques do Ninpo practitioners consider dangerous and we can't use in competition?
there's going to be, mostly it's the stuff that we get made fun of for online, right?
Right. Like you can't do hair pulling in competition. You can't hit
Right.
to the groin. You
No,
can't finger lock. I don't think.
no, you can't.
I don't know all the rules from
And there are different rules in different competitions, right? Like groin kicks and, things like that. And in reality, some of these things, they can give you an advantage if you can pull it off, right? It's like, I'm not going to, obviously a lot of these are over dramatized, just, gouge someone's eyes out or, kick them in the groin and they're done for. That's not realistic. But if you're already up close with someone and that target presents itself, sure, why not? But things like, for example, gyakuzé onage, right? Let's say we get someone's arms, where if imagine someone's behind me, I have their back, their chest is facing my back, and I have both their arms, I pull it over my shoulder, I cross them, and their elbow comes right past my shoulder, so their elbow is in front of my shoulder. If I can get that and I pull it down, right, from their wrist, you need very, very little weight, pressure
Right.
from your wrist to push my fingers to push their wrist down before both their elbows snap. So in Japanese jiu-jitsu, what we do to practice it is pull it over our shoulder, bump up, right? Feel them hop up on their toes. We know they're feeling it because they come up on their toes, but we do it with enough control that we don't break their elbow right away.
Right.
And then as soon as they bump up, we pull ourselves back into their chest to save their elbow and then hip throw them forward. So yes, it's harder to do that. Then, I don't want to get into the whole argument about, muscle memory. But, sometimes we make things harder on ourselves so that we can do a technique safely, but it's not that something like that can't be done. So I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, I think so. So we have a question from Steph. Bujinkan seems loosely held by Hatsumi Sensei in terms of organization on purpose, as opposed to Tanamura Sensei tightly controlling the Genbukan. I heard that Hatsumi Sensei wants to keep the arts more relevant and open to modern day evolving. That's so that's not really a question, it's more of a statement. And that's actually a pretty interesting concept. And I never thought about that. Maybe Hatsumi
It is an interesting perspective. I agree.
wants the teachers to evolve the art itself, versus where Tanamura Sensei is strict with this is how you do it, but then again, it's a catch-22 because in the Bujinkan you can't get Ruha licensing. At least I'm not aware of, unless they changed the rules recently. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Where in the Genbukan, we got Ruha licensing. I'm certified in several Ruha, so are you. But to get licensing those arts, you have to do it that way, right? So it's a catch-22. It's different strokes for different folks, I guess. Chris asked, at what point do you feel participating in competitions should be thought about with regard to the training journey up to past Shodan? I'm not sure if I understand the question.
So I'm assuming the question is asking how important should we make like competition for students before before granting them black belt Shodan. Okay. So if that's what the question is, I do think that's a good question. It's the thing with that is, if you're teaching a purely self-defense system, how do you get someone, force someone to do a competition? You can't, because not everyone wants to do it. And at the same time, we don't want to cater our teaching to just what the public wants, because we know what's better, right? That's our job to know better. So that goes back into what we've been talking about, like randori and sparring, right? Have like stress inoculation drills, things that we do.
I think it depends on the person, and because different people do martial arts for different reasons, right? I know people that have done martial arts for just socializing, right? Because maybe they don't have close friends or whatever. Mm-hmm. A person like that is not going to want to know what it's like to get hit in the face. or do a competition, but somebody that is learning self-defense or wants to learn self-defense, I think you need to know, if you've never been in an altercation, you need to know what it's like to be hit in the face.
Right.
Because if you get hit in the face, like, you need to know how to take it, because that's going to be the first shocker. You're going to get hit in the face, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I just got hit in the face.
Yeah.
And you're going to freeze.
Right. And then your mind just goes out the window. You're frozen. Some people, you'll start shaking or whatever, get an adrenaline rush, and you don't have that muscle memory or that experience to really to know how to calm yourself and really just react. No, absolutely. Absolutely true.
Xavier asked, can hand-to-hand combat help ninjas?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love utilizing, my experience from boxing into my classes. Phenomenal, boxers have phenomenal footwork. Really, really good shoulder head movement. Stuff like that is really helpful if you want to know how to get inside someone's punching or throwing haymakers or hooks. How do you throw someone or submit them if you can't get close enough to grab them?
Right.
You can't do that without good footwork, without good, hand-to-hand striking. So you have to know different skills. It's not just grabbing someone and wait for them to, hold on to your shirt, hold their arm out like this forever, and you get to do whatever you want to them for a good 5 minutes.
Right. And Chris said, my earlier question is more about when a person should start thinking about My earlier question is more about when a person should start thinking about it when it's offered. What are your thoughts on how the training dynamic has changed over the years to be softer compared to what it was in some other organizations? An example, the physical connection.
That was a lot.
I can see you very analytical.
Yes. All right. I'm going to try my best. Mind you, I came into this podcast working, almost like 9 hours today, almost nonstop. So anyhow, so I would say that, again, I'm going to kind of fall back onto, it's really up to the individual. Now, for me, I would prefer that, someone starts doing that as soon as, they would get like their, I would say probably until they're about middle Q ranks. So we, for us, we have, 10 ranks before black belt, and each rank is called a Q. So, they're pretty much split into thirds, right? Minus the first one, which is just your basic beginner level. That's your white belt. And then we have green belt, right? Then it's pretty much split between a bunch of, between green belt and brown belt with a bunch of stripes in between. But the rest of those 9 ranks, if you look at them in thirds, it's really beginner, medium, and advanced, right? If you split that in 3, I would say by the 4th to 6th ranks is ideally when people should start getting into competitions, in my opinion, because that's what's going to allow you to really realize, your basic techniques from your first few ranks, and now trying to utilize them in a realistic situation, or in a live environment, I should say instead. And then by the time you're in your last third, that those last 3 ranks before black belt, you should ideally have enough competency in those and all the techniques before to really bring you up slowly to being a black belt level.
Right.
Did I capture the whole question? Because
I think you did. I think you did. He can ask you in person if it's not if your answer is not what he was looking for. Stephanie asked, do you think Ninpo needs to evolve? I don't know if you just joined in, Stephanie, but we kind of talked a lot about this. I would go back and rewatch it, but yes, Ninpo needs to evolve, and I think Ninpo.us is going in the right direction as far as evolving. And her second part of the question is, how do we find balance between preserving the past and adapting to the present?
Balancing the past, preserving the present. Good question. I like that. I think when it comes to traditional martial arts, especially Ninpo, something that we do really well is the spiritual side. And this is something that's widely misunderstood by people who don't understand traditional martial arts. The correction of your heart is inevitably what's going to change you from being ego driven to someone that's a humble martial artist. And I think that having doing that meditation, that calming, of understanding the spiritual side of martial arts, it helps you with your day-to-day activities. I'm not talking about just the confidence to take on tough like at your work, dealing with people, or having confidence to do that. It's having that the knowledge of looking at things from a different perspective, no matter what your religious beliefs are, but from a different spiritual approach, just makes viewing things in the world a lot easier. For example, with Ninpo, obviously everyone knows you don't fight fire with fire. And the physical side of some of the techniques, right? Like there's certain stances, if you will, we'll say stance, that are very fire, very aggressive, very forward, moving, very dominating. And then you have other techniques that are very like water-based. You take energy and you redirect it back. Right. Now, you don't fight fire with fire. That's just, whoever's the stronger fire is going to win. That's inefficient. Now, if you redirect it, right, back at them, that's a lot more efficient, and you utilize a lot less, excess energy. Now, same thing at work. I, worked for a very tough client, until I just recently changed, to a different role recently in my day job. And that was constantly, fire every single day. And, it was, if it wasn't for my Ninpo training, I wouldn't have known how to really, work around it. Knowing something and really believing and comprehending are two different things. Everyone knows you don't fight fire with fire, right? That's common sense. But if it wasn't for my training, even from the physical side, I wouldn't have gotten through the job with,
Right.
But again, another long-winded answer. But I think that's the traditional side of martial arts is very important to keep stuff like that alive and thriving in today's world, especially in a world where it's easy to just go online and start talking trash about people, and you don't need to have any sense of self-control because you're not physically in front of them. But then you're a total introvert when it comes to being in person, that you don't even have the courage to say anything to someone. So the traditional side, I think, is what really helps keep martial arts ego-free. Not that that's always true, but I think that's, from my experience, that's what I've seen more so true.
Right. And I think to add to what you just said, I totally agree with you, by the way. The way, let's just talk about from a physical standpoint. I think, because we do both here in my school, right? We train in the traditional stuff, we do kata, but we also do a lot of randori, grappling, things like that. I think you can have a class, say if you have an hour-long class, you can have a class and you can split it up. You can do a half-hour traditional, half-hour modern, and just do randori, you just can't do, to be a well-rounded Ninpo martial artist, you just can't do just one or the other. Right. That's my belief.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not knocking modern martial arts either. Like I said, different strokes for, different folks. Everyone has a different reason for what they do. And like I said, I've mostly been in modern martial arts prior to this training, right? So, and I've met lots of people that are very humble. But personally, for me, my flavor is, I definitely like the traditional side mix, well balanced with the whole modern side.
I agree. Xavier asked, do you prefer grappling or weapons?
That's a tough one. It really comes down to the situation. Simple answer, if I had to pick, I would probably say grappling, simply for, the realism aspect of it. Mm-hmm. But with weapons, like, if there's a guy that's, twice my size and, he's, he knows some technique, I can clearly see it, and I have an umbrella in my hand. Well, if I know how to use a staff or a sword or whatever, I can now utilize that, give me an advantage. So it's also important. But short answer, I would probably say the hand-to-hand grappling. It hurts to say that because I love working with weapons too.
John asked, with COVID-19 and the new norms, do you think it will change the dynamic of the way training will happen for the future?
Oh man.
Even after schools open, he said even after schools can open again.
I hope that people aren't afraid to grapple.
Right. I think, obviously there's going to, I have a high feeling it's going to be, how many people can be in the building, things like that. I think, you're going to have crazy amounts of hand sanitizer available and, wiping down the mats in between classes and things like that. But I think a lot of training there, I think even now, a lot of people are not doing self-training, right?
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this yesterday,
Yeah.
right? Right. Most of my training, as far as Ninpo, the stuff I know the most was done in an office with my teacher, just us talking. Okay.
Wow.
Kuden, right?
Right.
So I would say, and I had this discussion with a student of mine today that I gave a private lesson to as well. I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would say 70%, 60 to 70% of our training has nothing to do with physical ability.
I'm thinking hard about that split. That's very interesting. And, it kind of goes with what I tell my students. And I always tell them that 5% of self-defense is actually like your technique. 95% of it is in your head.
Exactly.
And, what makes up that 95%? Yes, it's also, a lot of physical technique that goes, in that as well. But it's that confidence, it's the knowledge in everything, it's the application, constantly practicing, at home, which again, kind of tying back into the physical side as well. But no, I think that's very what's the word? Underrepresented. Help me out here. This is I'm losing my mind here.
Undervalued.
Undervalued. Yes, the lecture side, the Kuden side.
Right.
I think it's very important to have that knowledge.
Yeah. To add to that, it's one thing to, go through a Q level and regurgitate techniques, but do you fully understand the Kuden behind them, Kuden behind each technique, and do you fully understand how to apply them in every type of scenario, not just from kumiuchi or not just from a punch or not just from a kick? Can you do, a gyakuseo nage from, from a punch or from kumiuchi or from behind, and I think a lot of students miss this out, and I try to, maybe I'm doing a terrible job of trying to relate this to my students, but I feel like that part's missing, that they're not understanding is your Ninpo training has a lot to do with Kuden, verbal transmission, research and study on your own, and asking questions.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Absolutely. Can't deny that. And, that's something that everyone should be taking advantage of right now, no matter what you're training in, whatever art it is, even if it's things like boxing, right?
Right.
Practice at home. And that's what I keep telling, my students is practice at home, because, being in the gym or at the dojo or, whatever, the dojang, whatever, you train in, whatever you call it, that's not a lot of time compared to all the time you're spending at home.
Exactly.
You're not going to be an efficient martial artist if all you do is only train in school.
Thank you very much, Omar. I think sometimes people think I'm crazy when I say you got to practice at home. They look at me like I have two heads. You know what I mean? Like, what do you mean practice at home? You
Well,
know?
you and I, when we were training in Delaware together, we trained for 10 to 13 hours a week,
Yep.
right? Between 3 to 4 classes, couple hours every single evening. And then that's excluding, like going at home and, showing off videos to each other and stuff like that, doing techniques, even just for fun, you and I throwing each other around in the backyard and whatever, recording videos and stuff, that's excluding that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's crazy. Yeah. So we were going 3 to 4 times a week. We never missed a seminar. We trained on our own in your backyard, at your old other apartment complex, the one
Yeah.
you were at before the one you're in now.
Yeah.
And we borrowed Mark Sensei's dojo from time to time.
I still have those embarrassing videos.
Yeah. And we were doing research. We were asking questions. We were emailing back and forth, messaging back and forth. Hey, take a look at this. Hey, take a look at this. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I want to say one thing about that, by the way. You ever notice the difference in our after dojo outings from Delaware to how they are now?
What do you mean?
I remember anytime we would go out, we had the opportunity to go out with, some of our senseis in the past, the types of questions we asked.
And give the crowd an example.
Basically things like, Sensei, I'd like to, hear more about this Ruha. Sensei, where did this Ruha come from? Or, Sensei, can you talk to me about this technique?
Right.
Sensei, you talked about something about like this in class last week. Can you please elaborate on that?
Mm-hmm.
And those were entirely our discussions, entirely.
Right.
And so we would literally go out to these, obviously not saying it wasn't for good company, because that was obviously a big part of it. But it was also, we knew that if we spent that extra effort, it was not really extra effort, right? Especially for us.
Extra time with Sensei, yeah.
Right. That, we would also, aside from having a good time, come out with even more knowledge that we wouldn't get in class. And I have, just a couple students that are like that. And the majority of the students that I have, and I'm not a big group, I never really have been, not like yours, but 95% of my students, more than that, I would say 98% of my students aren't like that. It's just, talking about, the stuff that's happening every day and what's going on in your life and talking about all sorts of random stuff. And, that's fine. But I just, there's a difference.
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's the Kuden.
Right. A lot. I have great students. Don't get me wrong.
You certainly do.
They're very skilled and things like that. But I wish they asked more about certain things. Kuden. Just trying to figure out puzzles. You know what I mean? I feel Ninpo is a big puzzle. And you kind of have to, those big puzzles that come with like 1,000 pieces. That's what I think of Ninpo, and you have to kind of like put the puzzle together, right? Yeah. And I'm still doing that, right? My puzzle will never be complete, right? And nobody that trains in this art will have a complete puzzle. But
right.
Obviously, I'm farther along. We're farther along than our students. But there's some out there that have yet to pick up a puzzle piece and try to put it together. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's a great time to be training right now.
Yeah, I agree. I've actually upped my personal training. I'm watching more videos. Nice. And reading more books and things like that. Because I have, not that I have more time, but it's being away from my students. It makes me sad. So doing it at home and watching the videos at home and reading the books makes me a little more sane. But
yeah, I agree.
yeah, so thank you very much, Omar, for coming on board. I think we talked today.
Wow.
This
Yeah,
is
it's
a great conversation. This is a great
but
conversation.
it was.
Hopefully everybody enjoyed it, and you know, hope to do this again with you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. For anyone that has watched this live or that will watch this, thank you. Shoot me a message if you ever have any questions. I'm always open to answer questions. I may not get back to you right away, but I'll eventually get back to you.
Right.
But seriously,
so if you want to plug your dojo, go ahead, just in case there's people in the Virginia area that want to train, and you can also plug in Josh's dojo as well.
Okay. I guess I'll leave that in the comments. Do I have to do that while it's live, or can I just wait?
Yeah, just do it live. You know, where
Okay.
where you guys located? What's the name of the school? I know I said it.
Oh, just to mention. Okay. Yeah. So I'm located my school is located in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. Yamajiro Ninja Academy. I don't know if you can see it right there. All right. Yamajiro Ninja Academy. YamajiroDojo.com. We're on Facebook. I believe it should be linked to this live podcast as well. And my student, Sensei Josh Friedland, his school is located in Alexandria, Virginia, and his school, it goes by the name of Ninvolution, also known as Yamagiri Dojo. And so you can look that up at ninvolution.com. That's NINVOLUTION.com. If you need the spelling for my school, YAMAJIRODOJO.com, making sure I didn't skip any letters. But yeah, that's it.
Well, there you go. So if you're in the Virginia area, you're looking to learn Ninpo martial arts or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu martial arts, those are your guys to go to. Well, thanks, Omar. Have a good night, and tell the wife and kid I said hello.
All right, thank you. Will do. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.